Continuing with reading my English translation of the Quran, I am reading chapter 02, the account of the Heifer of Israel. I will now read verses 252 to 259. Those were some divine rulings that manifested the intervention of God's hand in the affairs of man. We, the voice of the Spirit of humanity, shall read to you verses that provide rulings authorized by God's inherent right to rule over all people. As you are a duly appointed member of the club of God's messengers and prophets, we, the voice of the Spirit in control of all providence, had endowed those messengers with varying degrees of favors that distinguished each from the other. For some, the favor materialized in them having a dialogue with Allah, the Spirit of all people, the God of all, and for others the favor showed itself when He elevated them to higher ranks among men. We handed Jesus, the Son of Mary, the proofs of God's favor to him and filled his soul with the power of the Holy Spirit. The proofs of their legitimate commissioning as messengers were provided, yet the people that came after them made wars with each other because it was God's will. If He had intended them not to fight, He could have easily done that. Alas, the people that came after them had their deep differences. Some of them believed God to be their sole protector, while others rejected that notion and defied His supreme authority. If God had intended them not to fight with each other, He could have easily done that. But the God of all, the Spirit in control of all the forces of life and annihilation, Allah, acts in the end in accordance with His own precepts. We say to you, O people that believed God to be your sole protector, your security comes from God and not your money. Do not fret over spending some of that money that you had made from our generous providence. Start spending it before the coming of that day for you, when you will be in a world it cannot buy anything for you, when the income from your investments can no longer be a source of support to you, and when money fails to buy you agents to advocate on your behalf. People that deny the inevitable coming of that day and disregard planning for it are the ones doing their own souls a great injustice. Allah is the one and only everlasting, transcendent Spirit that rules over creation. Man-made gods are not transcendent spirits. Allah, the Most High God, is the only deity that governs everything in your world. He is the eternally living continuum of providence. His is not of a nature that succumbs to exhaustion or sleep. He rules over all the affairs of your soul's heavenly ascendance and its earthly descending. Who is it that was able to plead for others before Him if such a privilege was not granted by Him? His perception of them is encompassing of all those things that possess their soul, from the beginning to the ending of their life journey. Their perception of Him is limited to what He had allowed their senses to perceive. The jurisdiction of His throne extends over all that is contained in the high heavens and on earth, and His energy never wanes in maintaining their delicate order. He is the highest authority above all, the Almighty. A creed of equal rights should not be an imposition forced on people against their will. No one should be coerced against his own willpower to convert from his moral creed. The voice of common sense and equal rights under the law had cut through the irrational noise of tribal superiority. And so anyone who refuses the protection of transgressing tyrants and entrusts his security to the hand of the Lord, the one protector of all, Allah the God, he will never find himself betrayed or deserted. It will be like he had tied his hand in a knot that will prove to be the most inextricable knot of all. The Most High God, Allah, the Spirit that speaks to the oneness of all, hears the voices of all people, and He is aware of all their unique perspectives. God is the guardian and protector of all the people that put their faith and trust in Him. He leads them out of the hopelessness of oppression into the light of freedom. But those that did not trust God to be their protectors are the transgressing tyrants. They lead them out of the light of freedom into the darkness of self-enslavement and oppression. They are the keepers of the flames of human pains. Hell will be the kingdom of their eternal existence. From what perspective would you perceive that story, the one about that man who had a dialogue back and forth with Abraham to assert the logic of his conclusion that he was the true Lord? The premise of his argument was that God had bestowed on him the throne of a kingdom, meaning that the God of all had supposedly given him absolute authority to rule as he pleased over the lives of people. Abraham said, God is the owner of the right to life. He renders life and renders death. Not the kings, the chiefs, or their idols. But the king objected, saying, I render life, I render death at my will. I own the authority over matters of life and death, and I command such things as I please. Then Abraham said, the God of all, the Lord of the universe, commands the sun to rise from the east. If you are whom you claim to be, then go ahead, command it to rise from the west. But the delusional king, who had become blind to the blatant existence of a higher power above him, did not have a rebuttal. He was astounded and dumbfounded. People accustomed to repressing God's given rights, like the tyrants, are not meant to receive the gift of God's guiding light. And how do you perceive the account of that man who passed through a certain village that laid in ruins, where the high and mighty of its society were cast out, and no one sat on its empty throne? He made an assessment and said, even God, the Spirit of life, Allah, cannot breathe life into this village and raise it from the dead. But God wanted to show him otherwise. So he cast the spirit of death over him for 100 years, and then he brought him back to life. Then the Lord asked him, how long have you stayed here in this city? The man replied, not long, maybe a day or even less than that. The Lord said, I am telling you the truth. You have been here 100 years. I made time stand still for the provisions you brought with you. Look, they are as fresh as that day when you came here. Your food and drink had survived the ravages of time, but not your donkey. We will make your experience a revelation of our absolute ownership of the right to life. Now look at the bones of your dead donkey, as we command them to rise from their death and join back together. Then look how we command the flesh to grow before your very eyes and dress up these bare bones. When he had seen with his own eyes how the force of life had revealed itself right before him, he realized who was truly the owner of that sacred right. He said, now I know this for a fact, that God is capable of doing any far-fetched thing, anything one could ever imagine. His designs can outlast any human design. He can make the impossible possible. Nothing can stand in his way. His power rules supreme above all powers.